For a long time, one of the biggest mysteries in Berserk wasn't the secret identity of Skull Knight or Void, or the origins of the God Hand, or even the identity of Guts' parents. No, it was something right in front of us, and perhaps that's what made it even more disturbing. Ever since chapter 89, every Berserk fan in existence had a single question on their minds: will Casca ever recover? The badass female captain of the Band of the Falcon lost her sanity to the violence and violation she experienced during the eclipse, and reverted to a childlike state in order to cope with the trauma. For a long time, she lived life as the mindless child woman Elaine, with her real self only showing up when her life was in incredible danger. Eventually, we did get to see Casca recover somewhat once Guts & Co. reached Elfhelm, but the question still remains pretty much the same, just with the addition of a single word: will Casca ever recover fully? This is a question that was relevant in chapter 89 and is still relevant as we wait for chapter 374 to come out, and we're here to give you all the answers. So, without further ado, these are our theories and predictions for when Casca will fully recover. But first, a short recap on what exactly happened in and before chapter 89, how Casca lost her sanity. Even if you aren't a Berserk fan, you might have heard about what happened to Casca during the eclipse, because it's an especially viscerally revolting moment in a series that is all about visceral and revolting moments. Berserk doesn't hold back when it comes to showing the ugly side of reality. We know this. Many people even think that it's all a bit too gratuitous, but in our opinion, Miura made it a point to have any kind of graphic scene mean something to the overall story, so it wasn't entirely pointless. But the thing is, what happened to Casca was pointless. It was done merely to establish one person's dominance over another, and the people involved are what make her violation such a harrowing ordeal to even read through, let alone watch in the animated shows. From the time we meet her to the time the eclipse happens, we know 3 things about Casca. 1, she was the second best fighter in the Band of the Falcon before Guts joined them. 2, she has a mean tongue and a meaner right hand if you cross her. And 3, she viewed Griffith as a veritable god on Earth. When Casca was a young girl, Griffith saved her from being assaulted by a nobleman. Well, he didn't exactly save her so much as he empowered her to save herself. He sliced off the lecherous nobleman's ear and tossed a sword in Casca's direction, asking her to fight for herself if she wanted to live. Casca did so, killing the man who would have likely ruined her forever psychologically, and started viewing Griffith as her savior. She forced her way into the Band of the Falcon, sort of, and dedicated herself to becoming a warrior without peer, which is how she became the second best fighter in the whole band. Casca worshipped Griffith as a man, but she also loved him as a woman herself, and she came to realize this much later in her life. She also came to realize that, given Griffith's ambition, she wasn't going to end up becoming his bride, so she resigned herself to being his sword until Guts entered her life in a romantic context. For the next 3 years of their association, Guts and Casca were water and oil, constantly fighting with each other and never being able to come to a consensus. But during the final stages of the 100-Year War, both of them went through experiences that made them appreciate each other and eventually fall in love with each other. The Casca that first arrived in Wyndham with Griffith was a very different woman from the Casca that left Wyndham after Griffith was captured for high treason. And the Casca that came to rescue Griffith after spending a year on the run, leading outlaw knights as a woman in a man's world, was a different beast altogether. Her definition of what her loyalty to Griffith meant to her changed once she fell in love with Guts, but it didn't shatter altogether. Casca still held Griffith in extremely high regard, and how could she not? He was the man that gave her the sword and the blanket that strengthened her to reach the position she had at that time in the story. Griffith had always looked out for her, despite it being rather troublesome to his plans at times, and had given her no reason to suspect he had a dark side. Because even when she saw him after he slept with Genon for money, he was able to spin it into such a tragically heroic tale that she had no option but to agree with his logic. But once Griffith was out of the Tower of Rebirth and into the back of a covered wagon, that perception of the White Falcon being a pure and noble being began shattering in her mind, and the eclipse was essentially the most horrifying wake-up call a person can get regarding their idols, as well as a culmination of this lifting of the veil from Casca's eyes. The first time she sensed that Griffith wasn't all that heroic was when he tried to force himself on her when she was tending to his wounds. After Guts defeated the Apostle Wild mostly by himself, and a sneaky assist from Zod, Griffith realized that Guts and Casca were an item, and that enraged him because Guts had taken away yet another thing that was his. So in order to reclaim that control, Griffith tries to force hump Casca Casca while she does his bandages, and all she can do is feebly hug him because even she gets what was going on here. Later, Guts finds Casca in tears because of the incident, but she doesn't tell him what happened and instead insists that she's fine and that they need to go their separate ways because she needs to stay by Griffith's side now that he was practically an invalid. Even after an attempted assault, Griffith still held a position of respect in her mind. He was still the man who empowered her at her lowest moment, who saved her from being violated all those years ago. Sure, he might have tried to do the same thing now, but he didn't actually succeed and he surely didn't mean it that way. Griffith was just broken, and Casca thought it was her duty to see to the pieces. But that assumption of hers was brutally shattered during the eclipse, when Griffith, in his new form as Femto, did the same thing to Casca that he saved her from when they first met. Chapters 86 and 87 are a difficult read, to put things extremely mildly, not only because of the abhorrent act that Griffith commits, but also because of the years of context behind it that is just so callously ignored by him in a move that was meant to establish his dominance over Guts. In that moment, Griffith not only breaks the false messianic image he had created for himself, for us, he also breaks Casca's mind. From the start of the eclipse to its bitter end, Casca only tries to protect her comrades from its horrors because, in that moment, she becomes the leader of the Falcons, not Griffith. Casca was the one who stabilized her ranks as soon as the apostles entered their release states, and she refused to run or give up as her comrades died around her. Even when she was cornered and about to be abused by a gang of apostles, Casca wasn't entirely gone. She was despairing at her situation, but her mind was still hers. But when her hero and idol violated her, that tiny sliver of sanity that remained within her was shattered. Casca completely lost her mind due to the trauma of the eclipse and adopted a childlike personality thereafter. This personality is what greets us in chapter 89, which is the aftermath of the eclipse. The sinking feeling in Guts' gut as he realizes that the strong warrior woman he fell in love with no longer was the same person is something that hits us at our very core, and is one of the reasons why the fandom often calls Berserk a love story. Without the ability to even form coherent words, let alone sentences, Casca became nothing but a liability for a man who was about to embark on a crusade against demonkind. So Guts left her, with Godot, Rickert, and Erica in the elfin ore mine near Godot's cottage, and for 2 years he wandered through the world, killing apostles, dead spirits, and anything else that attacked him in his ultimate search for the God Hand. During this time, he rarely thought about Casca, and only realized his own folly once his demon child gave him a vision of things to come during the incarnation ceremony. Once he was finally reunited with her in the midst of murderous blood blobs, a collapsing tower, and literal pillars of flame, he decided he was never going to let her out of his sight ever again. But that decision came with its own set of problems, chief of which turned out to be Guts himself. From St. Albion to Elfhelm, how Casca became Elaine and what happened to her during this time. After spending a couple of years within Godot's ore mine, Casca managed to escape one day and reached the outskirts of St. Albion, where she met Luca, everyone's favorite girl from Berserk, and no, not for the reasons you're thinking, perv. Luca immediately realizes upon meeting Casca that she's not right in the head, and the place where they met was actually a crowd that had gathered to greet the bloody Inquisitor Mosgus, so things could get real ugly real quick out there. She thought fast and named Casca Elaine, claimed that she was her sister, and took her to her encampment to look after her. Though Casca wasn't entirely aware of what was happening to her, the name Elaine stuck within her psyche, and it helped her differentiate this mindless phase of her life from her real self, as you'll see later on in the video. During this time, Casca always needed someone to protect her because she simply couldn't protect herself or be left unattended, which is what got her involved with the Great Goat and Father Mosgus in the first place. Though she wasn't exactly aware of the details of what was happening to her during this time, she could recognize the outline of things and react instinctually based off of that outline. Whenever someone would act a bit curtly with her, her guard would naturally go up, even if it was Guts. Casca seemed to be poised for at least a less dangerous life in the aftermath of the incarnation ceremony because she was now traveling with Guts, and that was about as safe as anyone could be in Berserk's world, or unsafe if you put the shoe on the other foot, but even that became a nightmare for her because of what happened during chapter 190. See, while Casca was practically a child following the eclipse, there would be brief moments where her old self would naturally show itself, and then disappear just as quickly. When Isidro saved Casca and Nina from the cultists outside St. Albion, he was able to lower Nina down the edge of a cliff relatively easily, but he had much more difficulty safely lowering Casca given her body weight and his size and strength. Isidro was about to give up unintentionally when Casca, in her Elaine state, gracefully hopped her way down the rest of the cliff as if she had never forgotten her training as a warrior. Immediately after doing this, she went back to acting like a child, which shocked both Isidro and Nina. This showed us that in a life or death situation, Casca was going to surface and help Elaine stay alive, no matter what. It was good to get confirmation that Casca was still herself at her core, but Berserk is a story where good and bad things are often interconnected, and this case is no different. After surviving the incarnation ceremony alongside Isidro, Serpico, Farnace, Azan, Puck, Luca, and all her girls, Guts decided that he was going to go off on his own path once again, but this time he was going to take Casca with him. He was not about to make the same mistake he made in the past and let another irreplaceable thing out of his sight, but the lifestyle of a person that's marked with a brand of sacrifice is nothing short of a living nightmare, and the intensity of that nightmare only increased with two branded individuals now traveling together. Guts found himself constantly being overwhelmed by the duty of protecting Casca and his inner instinct to slaughter anything that attacked him without a shred of mercy. He couldn't even rely on Puck to be a dependable lookout for him because the elf, while well-intentioned, wasn't exactly well-disciplined. On one particular occasion, Guts ended up losing Casca, who wandered off into the forest and was set upon by three thugs. The thugs saw the helpless pretty girl all alone in the woods and immediately decided to have their way with her, but just as they went to do so, something primal within Casca was triggered. She managed to grab one of the thugs' swords and killed all three of them while in her mindless state. Her body acted instinctively to protect itself from the thugs, but what could it do when the person assaulting her was Guts himself? The Black Swordsman had spent 2 years apart from Casca with nothing but death and malice nurturing his soul. When he was reunited with her, he realized he couldn't be with her because of her condition. But in that moment, when he saw her naked, covered in blood, and with 3 dead bodies lying around her, Guts must have thought Casca was back. His blood rushed to his head and he forced himself on her. His inner beast of darkness began compelling her to rip her to shreds and violate her just like Griffith did, which gave Guts pause because he realized he was about to tear off one of Casca's breasts with his bare teeth. Guts was shocked by his own actions and decided to take on companions thereafter because he no longer trusted himself around Casca, but the effect of this attack on Casca's psyche was even more severe. Though she did view Guts as her reluctant protector, that protector had nearly assaulted her, so Casca felt justifiably unsafe around him. Once Guts allowed his current party members to join him on his journey, Casca attached herself to Farnace, who became a motherly figure to her and started outwardly fearing Guts. She would often fight off his advances and give him angry glares because that incident ended up equating him with the eclipse for her subconscious brain. Guts had nearly given up all hope of ever restoring Casca's sanity when he learnt of Elfhelm and the Flower Storm Monarch's power to heal minds. He made it his life's mission to protect Casca on their way to Elfhelm, and throughout the journey, Casca remained her usual, bratty, childish Elaine self, except for whenever a certain boy would show up on the night of a full moon. You see, immediately after losing her sanity to Griffith's assault, Casca ended up delivering a half-human, half-demon baby without even realizing that she was pregnant in the first place. This demon child ends up haunting Guts during his time as the Black Swordsman, as its very existence is a reminder of the last act that was seared into Guts' blind right eye. But it is also the only thing that Casca feels a near instinctual connection to, even in her mindless state, because at the end of the day, it's still her child, and the bond between a mother and their children is sort of natural in that sense. Casca's demon child protects her when Guts is not there to save her during the incarnation ceremony, and ends up becoming a part of Griffith's vessel when he incarnates into the physical world. But it shows up after the ceremony in the form of the mysterious Moonlight Boy. The Moonlight Boy appears for the first time as Guts and co make their way to Vertanis, and the entire crew is shocked to see the childlike Casca acting all motherly towards this unknown child. Guts doesn't realize that the Moonlight Boy is his son with Casca operating through the vessel of Griffith's body, and the three of them, that is, the boy, Guts, and Casca, end up sharing the only family-like moment that they will ever have in the series during its first appearance. It was only when the Moonlight Boy showed up that Casca showed signs of being something besides a PTSD psychosis victim, and in a strange way, it also gave Guts hope that she would be okay once they reached Elfhelm. As for her actions, Casca doesn't really get too involved with whatever happens during the Millennium Falcon arc, and the only time her character becomes relevant again is when the Black Swordsman party finally reaches Elfhelm, because there, Guts gets confirmation that the Flower Storm Monarch can indeed restore Casca to her former self. But there's a massive catch to the process. For a person suffering through trauma as intense as Casca, healing her mind wasn't going to be as simple as drinking a healing potion and sleeping overnight, only to wake up and find out that the voices in your head are now gone. Casca's psyche needed to be pieced back together bit by bit, and even then there was no guarantee that things would work out the way Guts wanted them to. A long time ago, Skull Knight had told Guts that while reaching Elfhelm might help Guts accomplish his goals, there was no guarantee that it would work, and that even if it did, there was no telling that his wish would be hers as well. At the time, we didn't know why he said this, but we figured it out immediately once Elaine was put to rest and Casca finally woke up. She does recover, but there's a massive catch involved, and we're not sure that she'll ever be the old Casca again. Why Casca waking up isn't as good as we think it is. To make a very long video very short, yes, Casca does recover. At this point in the story, she is no longer the helpless Elaine who was viewing everything that was happening to herself from within her own body as if she were in the sunken place. The Flower Storm Monarch has Shirke and Farnace participate in a ritual called the Corridor of Dreams, where the two mages follow Danon's guidance through Casca's subconscious and literally piece her sanity back together bit by bit. At first, Casca's psyche appears to be a series of children's drawings, which is reflective of her mental state as Elaine. But once Shirke and Farnace go deeper within her mind, they arrive at a site that very closely resembles the eclipse. There they find a hound that looks like Guts, lugging around a coffin. Inside the coffin is a shattered doll in the semblance of Casca, and this doggy and dolly duo is meant to represent Casca's personal reflection of her current mental and emotional state. The assault during the eclipse broke her from the inside, and she feels like a dead mannequin being pulled around by Guts and the rest of the crew most of the time. Shirke and Farnace fend off several apostle apparitions and a femto-like falcon to gather all the pieces of the broken Casca to make her whole again. But when they get to the final piece, they realize that they have a problem. The final piece of Casca's broken psyche was being guarded by the demon child at the center of a site that looked very much like the God Hand altar from Griffith's eclipse. Once Shirke and Farnace got past the child, they realized that the final fragment was a heart, but the heart was covered in thorns. Shirke realizes that this is an anathema, which means that if they made Casca whole again, her memory would be restored, but it would be forever cursed as well. Throughout this entire ordeal, Farnace is mulling things over because she made a promise to the tiny Casca that hid within the broken doll that she would help her see Guts again. She decides to risk it and put the heart back inside the doll, curse and all, because otherwise their entire journey would have been meaningless. Shirke agrees. They go through with it, and Casca wakes up with the glow that was characteristic of her before the events of the eclipse. Shirke notes that her real life force is completely different from the life force of her Elaine state, and with each step that Casca takes, more of her memories come flooding back into her mind. The first thing she does is thank everyone for taking good care of her and making her her again. But the first thing she really wanted to do was see Guts again. Casca makes her way out of the Corridor of Dreams, filled with anticipation at finally getting to see the man she loves. But the moment she sees Guts' face, flashbacks to the eclipse play out in front of her eyes. Casca grabs her bosom, which is where her brand of sacrifice is, and falls down with a blood-curdling scream. Turns out, this was the curse that she was going to have to work through by herself now. When Casca woke up after passing out from the PTSD episode, she goes about her day as normally as you can expect, getting some training in with Viking golems and Isidro. But once again, when she goes to talk to Guts about all that's happened and compares Isidro to Judo, her mind flashes back to the moment of Judo's death, and Guts is rendered helpless because Casca only gets even more terrified when she sees his face these days. When she isn't reminded of the eclipse, Casca is fine, but as soon as she sees anything that reminds her of it, like Apostles, Guts, or even Griffith, which does happen in chapter 364, she collapses in anguish because she now suffers from severe PTSD of the non-psychotic variety. The only thing that remains consistent is her behavior towards the Moonlight Boy, because when the boy shows up in Elfhelm, Casca instinctively slips back into her motherly role. But the moment that she realizes that this boy is actually her demon child fused with Griffith, it becomes too late to quantify whether her sanity can ever be fully recovered. Casca has made incredible progress with clinging on to her regained mental state. In chapter 372, we saw that while she had been put under some kind of mind control trance by Griffith, Griffith after he kidnapped her and took her to Falconia, there are brief flashes of her real life within Casca's mind, and these show us that she hasn't entirely forgotten herself again. The chapter opens with Casca's perspective of the destruction of Elfhelm, as, despite being in a near-fatal pain thanks to her proximity to the God-Hand Femto, all she could think about was how if she left Guts now, he might never recover again. She then wakes up thinking it was all a dream and goes about her day in Falconia as usual, but when she goes to take a bath, she again catches glimpses of the gang, and for a few moments snaps out of whatever mind control Griffith has her under these days. In those brief moments of clarity, Casca becomes the badass warrior woman we know and love, as she smashed a Falconian guard's head in with a vase and managed to cut off another's arm before trying to stage an escape all by herself. All the while, she was thinking about how she could get back to Guts, but in the end, Griffith's guard overwhelmed her and put her back to sleep, which presumably resets the mind control illusion. These brief flashes of Casca trying to break out are a sign that she has recovered enough to know who she is and what she wants, but once again, she finds her mind being played with by Griffith, so we cannot, in good conscience, say that Casca has fully recovered. And unless she and Guts have an honest confrontation about that time he nearly assaulted her in the woods, we don't think the thorny curse around her heart is going to go away, because in order to fully recover, Casca needs to work through the pain of the worst event of her life, the eclipse. It broke her faith in the man she idolized for many years. It flipped her concept of heaven and hell upside down. It left her broken, slashed open, and violated, and also led to the birth of her only solace in the world, which also ended up being corrupted because this is Berserk and Griffith doesn't know how to leave things be. At this point in time, we know why Griffith is keeping Casca around, and we are sure that when she reunites with the Moonlight Boy, it will be the most bittersweet moment to occur in the manga for a good while. But that still doesn't mean that she will recover when she meets the kid. The way the story is going, it is becoming more likely by the day that killing the Moonlight Boy is in fact the only way to defeat Griffith, and this is where Skull Knight's prediction about Guts and Casca wanting different things even after she regains her sanity becomes relevant to us. Think about it for a minute. Back when the demon child was born, Casca's natural instinct was to protect it, but Guts' natural instinct was to kill it. He knew the child was a demon, and that was good enough for him. He even continued trying to kill the demon child after finding out that it was his. The only things that stopped him from doing so were Casca or the demon child demanifesting from the physical world usually. But he didn't show it the mercy that its mother did. Casca maintains that same protectiveness over the Moonlight Boy, but Guts' behavior towards him is different. He still has no idea that Griffith and the Moonlight Boy are related, or at least he didn't until the boy turned into Griffith in chapter 364. Up until that moment, Guts treated the Moonlight Boy with far more kindness and respect than he ever did the demon child, despite the fact that they were practically one and the same. Once he sees the boy transform into Griffith, he immediately goes after the God Hand member, but fails to land a single hit on him. Griffith flies off with Casca, Guts ends up in the hull of the Seahorse, Elfhelm drowns, and only a handful of sorcerers and sailors survive the ordeal. Most astral creatures disappear within the island, and Casca ends up in Falconia, a world apart from the man she most wants to be with. Or maybe she's already with the person she wants to be with, only she has to wait for the full moon to really bask in his company. What if killing the Moonlight Boy is what Skull Knight was talking about back in chapter 237? If that's the case, then you can forget about Casca ever recovering fully, because if that's the route the story ends up taking, you know it's going to be Guts who does the deed. And at that point, your guess is as good as ours as to what happens to Casca. She could go berserk on Berserk's protagonist, she could revert her to her Elaine state, or she could just pull a Caitlyn Stark until someone finally, mercifully puts her out of her misery. Either way, Casca is never going to recover the way we think she will in an ideal world, because that's the whole point of Berserk. This world is far from being ideal, and if it was the utopia that Griffith pretends it is, then we wouldn't have to make this video in the first place. Marvelous verdict. But speaking of making videos, we're afraid that's gonna be it for this one. Casca's sanity has been a major thematic anchor for Berserk in that it's been the one thing that has, ironically enough, kept Guts human. At the same time, it's also exposed his inhuman side as well, and that's what we love about the story. As of this moment, Casca lies on a bed in Falconia, a bird trapped in a massive falcon-shaped prison. We don't think we're gonna see her again this year because we suspect chapter 374 will pick up right after the cliffhanger from 373, so let us know what you think about our prediction for her character arc in the comments down below. Do you think Casca will ever fully recover? If so, tell us why. And if not, well, same thing. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you liked the content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, strugglers.